Video games are an art form, and that's somehow controversial. And it's been controversial for a very long time, basically since games were invented. But to give you an example, Roger Ebert, a famous American film critic, can be quoted as saying this on the subject. To my knowledge, no one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great dramatists, poets, filmmakers, novelists, and composers. For most gamers, video games represent a loss of those precious hours we have available to make ourselves more cultured, civilized, and empathetic. I have a link to the article with the full quote in the description. I think most of us would readily admit that Mr. Ebert couldn't be more wrong. But why is that? Well, for starters, video games are typically an amalgamation of multiple different art forms. They can offer striking visuals, animations, emotional music, moving stories, and often employ strategies used by many filmmakers. Take all of those things, smash them together, add some interactivity, and you've got a game. To even imply that video games are incapable of providing an emotional experience akin to your favorite book, movie, music, or visual art is short-sighted at best. My apologies to any critics who are watching this and disagree, but I'm not sorry. Coincidentally, our boy Roger had something to say about this as well, stating, "One obvious difference between art and games is that you can win a game. It has rules, points, objectives, and an outcome. Santiago might cite an immersive game without points or rules, but I would say then it ceases to be a game and becomes a representation of a story, a novel, a play, dance, a film. Those are things you cannot win. You can only experience them." This is a statement he made in an article titled "Video Games Can Never Be Art." Again, link in the description. Ironically enough, even old Roger changed his mind after he played a video game he enjoyed. Cosmology of Kyoto, by the way, a game that seems to only really be known as the one that Roger Ebert liked. But in the article, "Okay Kids, Play on My Lawn," where he originally made the statement that video games can, in fact, be art, he extended this notion to games as a whole, drawing attention to some specific games, such as Shadow of the Colossus. Nowadays, it's not as bad as it used to be. Most people are willing to admit that games are an expression of creativity and imagination, that they can capture the hearts of an audience, evoke emotion, and connect with people, make them more cultured. Whether you enjoy video games or not, games are an art form. It's an objective fact, and while I would love to do an entire video on that someday, today we'll be taking a look at Gris, a game that I believe is proof of games as an art form. It would be an understatement if I said that I found Gris to be an incredibly emotional journey. Right from the get-go, you're presented with this harrowing depiction of loss. Gris can be seen here singing. She's depicted in a colorful world, high above the clouds. The music she takes part in is incredible and emotional. But eventually, while she sings, her world begins to crack and crumble. Her voice gives out. Her anxiety becomes overwhelming. Her world is falling apart. Everything around her plummets. She tries to run from it, but inevitably, she falls too. This was an incredibly strong opening. All of the elements work together to drive home that sense of anxiety and loss and grief. The animation is fluid and expressive. The music reinforces everything on screen, and just like how grief often comes on suddenly and without warning, the game thrusts us into the emotion it wants to portray effectively and without mercy. Gris is a story told without any words because it simply doesn't need any. It's filled to the brim with symbolism, starting with its name, Gris, the Spanish word for gray, often associated with feelings of loss or depression. The opening we just witnessed is symbolic of loss, and the remainder of the game presents as a metaphor for the Kubler-Ross model, commonly known as the 5 stages of grief. Each chapter of the story takes us through a step in the grieving process and uses everything at its disposal to do so, starting with its use of color. When Gris finally lands on the ground, her entire world has been drained of it. All she's left with is gray. Eventually, as she progresses through each stage of grief, the colors slowly return. In much the same fashion, she begins her story rather helpless, but as she moves forward, gathers hope, and fights against her grief, she gains more tools to progress through the process and to weather the storm. All the while, every emotion is reinforced by beautiful music, which isn't shy to take the foreground to really drive home how Gris is feeling. Each track flows into the other seamlessly and weaves a tapestry of emotion that leaves you feeling every shred of her experience. All of those elements, combined with masterful animation and a visual style which is leveraged to perfectly accompany the gameplay, the colors, the music, and to depict the emotions, the struggle that Gris experiences, and to demonstrate her thoughts and feelings through a visual medium, all of these culminate in something astonishing. And nearly most impressively, it does all of this without forgetting that it's a video game. Real thought and effort were put into making sure this game not only looked and felt great on an emotional sense, but that the same was also true in a gameplay sense. Controlling Gris feels natural, her movements are fluid and precise. Each new ability that she gains throughout the game builds on her already existing toolset in a way that's easy to learn, doesn't interrupt gameplay, and feels rewarding. The environment design also reflects this. Gris is a puzzle platformer. Focus on the puzzle. Platforming, of course, is ever present, but not necessarily the focus. You won't be expected to perform feats with intense accuracy like you would in a game like Celeste, which I also have a video on. I recommend checking it out. Instead, you'll be solving bite-sized puzzles, which will involve a combination of problem solving and platforming to complete. These puzzles slowly ramp up in complexity over the course of the game, but always in a way that feels logical and builds on whatever your toolset may be at the time. And it does all of this without the need for a tutorial. The introduction of new mechanics is short and non-intrusive at worst, like when you gain a new skill and it tells you to push a button, or immersive at best, like when you run past this tree that changes when you jump. God, I love to see that sort of stuff. It teaches people without ever letting them know they're being taught. It's a tutorial without a tutorial. The only thing that pulled me out of the game was when I finished the first section and couldn't immediately turn around to look for the mementos I had passed over. Mementos are collectibles, by the way. If you get them all, you can unlock a short cutscene at the end of the game. But the thing is, Gris is one of those games that really wants you to experience a story at a specific pace, which makes a lot of sense to me, especially considering their artistic take on storytelling. Restricting the player from revisiting sections immediately gives the developer more control over pacing and how their story is delivered. Normally, I still really don't like when developers do this, but Gris gets a pass from me, and here's why. The game is really short. It's only about 3 or 4 hours long, and each of those 3 or 4 hours is stellar all the way through. Plus, when you reach the end of the game, you unlock the ability to revisit each chapter and several checkpoints within the chapters. By restricting my ability to revisit previous sections of the game before I had even finished, they actually opened the door for an improved experience. First, they enforced the pacing of the story, which means the narrative has more impact. Secondly, they offer more modularity for your replay, meaning you don't actually have to play through an entire chapter all over again, just a small section of it. So it saves time as well. Completionists rejoice. Part of what makes Gris an excellent game is that they put a lot of thought into every aspect of the experience, from the presentation to the mechanics. The developers clearly did everything they could to make sure everything played well together, which resulted in a wonderfully complete experience where every aspect of the game culminates into one great feeling. It really demonstrates why I personally love indie games. Without an impossibly large audience to satisfy, and without stakeholders and giant publishers breathing down their neck, independent developers are given so much leeway to explore how they want to present their game, and this is especially true with smaller experiences like Gris. The developers of Gris clearly knew their limits. They had a defined scope and they worked within it. Instead of expanding the game into some grand experience, they kept it small and focused on the parts that work well together, telling a story that, unlike most AAA games, is so far removed from cinematic and instead is something so symbolic and meaningful.